You ever hear about the dog that changed everything? Let me tell you a story. One that starts simple but takes a turn you won't expect. It happened years ago, right here in Willow Creek. There was this boy, Jake Carter, just 11 years old, growing up in a family that worked hard for every meal. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he was pedaling home, dust kicking up behind his worn-out bike tires. And that's when he saw it. A stray dog, barely standing, ribs showing through its thin coat, eyes dark and tired. It didn't whimper, it didn't beg, it just looked at him. Most kids would have kept riding. But Jake, he stopped. That one decision, that one moment of hesitation, set off a chain of events that nobody could have predicted. Because sometimes, the smallest choices lead to the biggest consequences. And let me tell you, this story is just getting started. What do you think happened next? Let me know in the comments, and if you love stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The sun had already begun its slow descent behind the rolling hills of Willow Creek, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. 11-year-old Jake Carter pedaled his worn-out bike along the gravel road leading to his family's small farmhouse. He had just finished his chores at Old Man Henderson's barn, cleaning out the stalls and stacking hay in exchange for a few extra dollars to help his parents. Jake's family wasn't well off, but they had each other. His father worked long hours at the lumber mill, while his mother baked and sold homemade pies to make ends meet. Though money was tight, they never let it break their spirits. As Jake neared the house, something unusual caught his eye: a small, frail dog limping along the roadside. Its fur was matted and covered in dirt, and its ribs showed through its thin skin. The dog stopped, its dark, weary eyes locking onto Jake's. It looked exhausted, as if it had been wandering for days without food or water. Jake slowed his bike and cautiously approached. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly, kneeling down. The dog flinched but didn't run. It simply stared at him with cautious curiosity, its tail giving a weak wag. Reaching into his backpack, Jake pulled out the remains of his peanut butter sandwich from lunch. "You hungry?" He tore off a piece and placed it on the ground. The dog hesitated before stepping forward, sniffing the food and gulping it down hungrily. Jake glanced around. The road was empty, stretching out in both directions with no sign of an owner. "Where's your home, boy?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. The dog had no home. Carefully, Jake reached out his hand. The dog tensed but didn't back away. Slowly, Jake brushed his fingers against its dirty fur. "You're all alone, huh?" he murmured, feeling a pang of sympathy. The sun had dipped lower now, and a cold breeze rustled through the trees. Jake knew he couldn't leave the dog out here. If he did, it might not survive the night. He hesitated, knowing his parents might not approve of bringing home a stray. But looking into the dog's eyes, he made up his mind. "All right, buddy, you're coming with me." Scooping up the trembling dog in his arms, Jake carried it toward home. As expected, his mother wasn't pleased. "Jake, we can barely feed ourselves," she said, crossing her arms as she looked at the pitiful animal curled up on an old towel in the kitchen. "We can't afford a pet. I'll take care of him," Jake pleaded. "He won't be any trouble. I'll share my food with him, and I'll work extra to buy dog food. Please, Mom." His father, who had just returned from the mill, sighed and ran a hand through his graying hair. "Son, we know you've got a good heart, but this isn't just about food. What if the dog's sick? What if he's got fleas?" "I'll clean him up," Jake promised, "and I can take him to the vet in town. I'll ask Mr. Henderson if I can do more chores for extra money." His mother glanced at the dog, who was now watching her with tired but trusting eyes. After a moment, she exhaled, shaking her head. "All right," she relented, "but he stays outside." Jake grinned. "Thank you, Mom. I promise, you won't regret it." He spent the next hour giving the dog a bath in an old metal tub, scrubbing away the grime and revealing a coat of soft golden fur beneath. "You're beautiful," Jake said as he dried the dog with an old towel. "You just needed someone to see it." The dog, now looking healthier already, wagged its tail. Jake grinned. "You need a name. How about Rusty?" The dog let out a small, contented bark as if in approval. From that night on, Rusty became a part of Jake's life. For weeks, Rusty remained a loyal companion. Jake kept his word. He worked extra hours at the barn, earning enough to buy dog food and even take Rusty to the vet, where he received vaccinations and a clean bill of health. Though his parents were hesitant at first, they soon warmed up to Rusty. His mother would sneak him scraps of food when she thought no one was looking, and his father sometimes tossed a ball for him after work. Even Jake's younger sister, Emily, adored Rusty, often curling up beside him on the porch. Rusty, in return, was fiercely protective of the family. He barked at strangers, chased away raccoons from the chicken coop, and always stayed by Jake's side. It was as if he understood that Jake had saved him, and he was determined to repay the kindness. Jake couldn't have known it then, but Rusty would one day do exactly that, in a way no one could have ever imagined. Over the next few years, Rusty became more than just a pet, he was family. No matter where Jake went, Rusty was always right by his side. Whether it was tending to the chickens, helping fix a broken fence, or simply lying under the old oak tree while Jake read a book. Despite their initial hesitation, Jake's parents had come to love Rusty. His mother often tossed him leftover scraps, and his father, though he never said it outright, would sneak Rusty pieces of jerky when no one was looking. Even Emily, now 8 years old, would fall asleep with her head resting against Rusty's side on the front porch. But Rusty was more than just affectionate, he was incredibly smart. One afternoon, as Jake was stacking firewood by the shed, Rusty suddenly began barking wildly. His ears were perked up, and he stood rigid, staring at something behind the trees. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked, setting down the firewood and following Rusty's gaze. Then, he heard it, a low growl. Jake's stomach tightened as he saw a pair of yellow eyes staring at him from the underbrush. A coyote. It was lean, hungry, and inching forward. Before Jake could react, Rusty launched forward, snarling. The coyote hesitated, its ears flattening. Rusty didn't back down. He bared his teeth, standing between Jake and the wild animal. The standoff lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, with a final warning growl, the coyote turned and disappeared into the woods. Jake exhaled sharply, realizing how close he had been to real danger. He knelt down and hugged Rusty tightly. "Good boy," he whispered, stroking his fur. "You saved me." Rusty licked his face, his tail wagging, as if to say, "That's what I'm here for." As the seasons passed, life carried on in Willow Creek. Jake grew taller, stronger, and more responsible. His father had finally been promoted at the lumber mill, and his mother's pies were becoming so popular that the town bakery had started buying them in bulk. But despite the small victories, life on a farm was never easy. One evening, a heavy storm rolled in. Rain poured down in sheets, hammering against the tin roof of their house. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the fields in stark, ghostly light. The wind howled, rattling the windows. Jake sat by the fireplace, Rusty curled up at his feet. Emily was huddled next to their mother on the couch, gripping her stuffed rabbit tightly. Their father was by the window, watching the storm with wary eyes. "This one's bad," he muttered. "Hope the chicken coop holds up." As if on cue, a sudden, deafening crack split the air. The entire house seemed to shake. Emily let out a small scream, and even Rusty leapt to his feet, ears flattened. "That was close," Jake said, his heart pounding. Sounded like it hit something nearby. His father grabbed a flashlight and peered outside. "The barn," he said grimly. "I think lightning struck the barn." Jake's stomach dropped. The barn wasn't just where they kept supplies, it was where their horse, Daisy, was sheltered. Without thinking, Jake bolted for the door. "Jake, wait," his mother called. But he was already outside, Rusty right on his heels. The rain was relentless, soaking through Jake's clothes within seconds. The wind whipped against him as he sprinted toward the barn, slipping on the muddy ground. When he reached it, his worst fear was confirmed. A fire had started. A burning section of the roof had collapsed, and flames licked hungrily at the wooden walls. Smoke billowed into the stormy night. Daisy was trapped inside, neighing in terror. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed the barn door handle and yanked, but it wouldn't budge. The heavy wooden doors were stuck. He turned to Rusty. "Find another way in, boy." Rusty, as if understanding, sprinted around the side of the barn. Moments later, Jake heard barking from the back. Rusty had found the smaller entrance they sometimes used for the goats. Jake ran toward it, coughing as smoke stung his lungs. Rusty was already clawing at the door, trying to push it open. Summoning all his strength, Jake kicked at the door. On the third try, it finally gave way. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, and the heat was unbearable. Daisy reared up in fear, her eyes wide. "It's okay, girl," Jake soothed, stepping forward. "I got you." Rusty ran to Daisy's side, barking encouragingly. The horse, though panicked, seemed to trust him. Jake grabbed her halter and tugged. "Come on, Daisy, we need to go, now." Through the smoke and chaos, they moved. Jake guided Daisy toward the exit, Rusty running ahead. Just as they reached the doorway, part of the ceiling collapsed behind them, sending embers flying. Jake shielded his face as he stumbled into the open air. Daisy galloped out. "Safe." Rusty, panting, ran to Jake's side and licked his cheek. Jake knelt down, gripping Rusty's fur. "You did it, boy," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You saved us again." The rest of the family arrived moments later. His father helped secure Daisy, while his mother wrapped a blanket around Jake's shoulders. "You could have been killed," she scolded, but her eyes were filled with relief. Jake simply smiled and looked down at Rusty. "I wasn't alone." His father crouched down and patted Rusty's head. "This dog, he's something special." Jake nodded. "Yeah, he really is." As the rain finally began to die down, Jake hugged Rusty once more, knowing deep in his heart that their bond was unbreakable. But neither of them could have imagined that, years later, Rusty would do more than just save Jake, he would save the entire family. The Carter family was returning home from town in their old pickup truck, winding down the narrow country road as the evening sun dipped below the horizon. Jake sat in the backseat with Rusty curled up beside him, his golden fur warm against Jake's leg. Emily was humming softly in the front seat, swinging her legs as their mother spoke to their father about the price of feed at the market. Everything seemed peaceful, until the deer appeared. It happened in an instant. A large buck leapt onto the road, its eyes glowing in the headlights. Jake's father jerked the wheel to avoid it, but the truck skidded on the damp road. The tires screeched as they lost traction. And suddenly, everything spun. The truck swerved off the pavement, crashing through the underbrush before slamming into a tree with a deafening impact. Silence followed. Rusty was the first to move. Dazed but unhurt, he scrambled out of the truck, barking frantically. Inside, Jake was slumped against the door, a deep gash on his forehead. His parents lay motionless in the front seats, and Emily was crumpled against her mother's side. The shattered windshield glistened under the moonlight, while the acrid scent of gasoline filled the air. Rusty whimpered, nudging Jake's hand with his nose. When his boy didn't wake up, Rusty turned to the others, sniffing their faces, hoping for a response. Nothing. Panic surged through him. He needed help, but they were miles from the nearest house. Determined, Rusty took off at a sprint. He ran through the darkened woods, his paws pounding against the damp earth. He didn't know exactly where he was going, only that he had to find someone. His nose twitched as he caught the faint scent of smoke and food in the distance. A house. Rusty pushed himself harder, weaving through trees, ignoring the thorny branches that scratched his coat. At last, he saw it. A farmhouse with a single porch light glowing in the dark. Without hesitation, Rusty bounded up the steps and scratched at the door, barking as loudly as he could. Inside, old Mr. Henderson, the farmer Jake often worked for, stirred from his chair. What in the world? He shuffled to the door and opened it to find Rusty, wild-eyed and frantic. "Rusty?" Henderson knelt down, noting the desperate urgency in the dog's eyes. "Something wrong, boy?" Rusty barked and turned, running a few steps away before looking back, urging the man to follow. Henderson's brow furrowed. He might have been old, but he wasn't slow. He grabbed his coat, his flashlight, and his shotgun before climbing into his truck. "All right, boy, show me the way." Rusty wasted no time. He sprinted back toward the crash site, his ears flattened against the wind. Henderson followed as best as he could, the headlights of his truck bouncing over the uneven dirt road. After what felt like an eternity, Rusty reached the wreckage, panting heavily. Henderson's truck rolled to a stop, and the old man jumped out, his flashlight sweeping over the scene. His breath caught in his throat. Dear God, he rushed forward, checking each member of the Carter family. Jake was breathing, but barely. Emily stirred slightly at the sound of his voice. Their parents remained still. Henderson wasted no time. He grabbed his radio and called for an ambulance. His voice sharp and urgent. Hang in there, kids, help's coming. Rusty whined, pressing himself against Jake's side as if willing him to wake up. The minutes dragged on, but soon, the wail of sirens broke through the stillness. Paramedics arrived, working swiftly to extract Jake's parents from the truck and load them onto stretchers. Jake groaned as they lifted him, his eyelids fluttering open for the briefest moment. Rusty? He mumbled. I'm right here, kid, Henderson assured him. Your dog saved your life. Jake's lips curled into the faintest smile before he slipped into unconsciousness again. Rusty followed the ambulance all the way to town, refusing to leave his boy's side. And when the doctors finally stabilized the Carters, they all agreed on one thing: without Rusty, they might never have been found in time. The sun had just begun to rise over Willow Creek, painting the sky in gentle hues of pink and gold. The Carter family was still in the hospital, recovering from the accident that had nearly taken their lives. Jake sat by the window in his hospital room, his arm wrapped in a sling and a few bandages on his forehead. He gazed outside, lost in thought. Rusty lay curled up at his feet, his golden fur slightly dirty from the ordeal, but his eyes alert and watchful as ever. A soft knock on the door interrupted Jake's thoughts. His mother and father entered, followed closely by Emily, who was still clutching her stuffed rabbit. Their movements were slow, their injuries still fresh, but they were alive. That was all that mattered. We spoke to the doctor, his mother said gently, sitting on the edge of his bed. We'll be discharged soon. We're going home. Jake let out a relieved sigh. That's great. His father nodded, his expression serious. The sheriff came by earlier. He wanted to talk about Rusty. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Rusty? He instinctively reached down and ran a hand through the dog's fur. What about him? His father exhaled deeply before speaking. Everyone in town heard what happened. The sheriff said Rusty ran over 3 miles to the nearest house to get help. If he hadn't, we might not have made it. Tears welled up in Jake's eyes. He had always known Rusty was special, but hearing those words solidified it. Rusty wasn't just a pet, he was a hero. The town wants to honor him. His mother added, smiling softly. They're planning something special. A few days later, when the Carter family finally returned home, they were met with an overwhelming sight. The entire town of Willow Creek had gathered in front of their house. There were banners, homemade signs, and even a large wooden plaque that read, Rusty, our hero. The sheriff stepped forward, tipping his hat. Jake, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, Emily, we're all mighty glad you made it home safe. And we all know it wouldn't have happened without Rusty. He cleared his throat and looked down at the golden retriever sitting faithfully by Jake's side. Rusty, you're a brave dog, and for that, we want to give you something special. One of the townspeople came forward, holding a collar with a golden tag engraved with Rusty's name. The sheriff knelt down and fastened it around the dog's neck. This here is a token of our gratitude. You saved a family, and in doing so, you reminded us all what loyalty and love really mean. Applause erupted from the crowd. Jake knelt beside Rusty, hugging him tightly. You're the best dog in the world, he whispered, voice thick with emotion. As life slowly returned to normal, Rusty continued to be the heart of the Carter family. He was no longer just a stray dog found on the side of the road. He was a legend in Willow Creek. Years later, when Jake had grown into a young man and prepared to leave for college, Rusty had grown older, his muzzle now speckled with white. The two sat together under the old oak tree where they had shared so many moments. Jake ran his fingers through Rusty's fur, eyes misty with the weight of time. You changed my life, buddy, he said softly. I'll never forget you. Rusty let out a contented sigh, resting his head on Jake's lap. In that peaceful moment, with the warm sun filtering through the leaves, Jake knew one thing for certain: no matter where life took him, the bond between him and Rusty would never fade. And in the heart of Willow Creek, The legend of the loyal dog who saved his family would live on forever. What do you think about today's story? Do you believe situations like this can happen in real life? If you have any thoughts or feedback, feel free to leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any exciting stories. See you in the next video.